Great, now I'm going to hand over to Ipek. Would you like to do our acknowledgement?
Hello, hello. Just wanted to say that the Climbing Cuties and the Melbourne Bi Network are based on the lands of the Kulin Nations, which is always and forever the home of the Woiwurrung and Wurundjeri people. Our work takes place on stolen lands that are under colonial occupation where sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to Kulin Nation elders past and present and acknowledge the LGBTQ plus Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have paved the way for us and those who are with us today.
Thank you. So my name is Riley. I'm the president of Climbing Cuties and I'll be your host for today. I'm just going to go around and we can do a little intro of everyone else that's in the session. So I'll start with Yolanda.
Hey everyone, my name's Yolanda. I'd like to start by also acknowledging that today I'm coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation up here in Sydney, and extend my respects as well to elders past, present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today to ask some good questions about bi people in sport. My background in sport is mostly in field hockey and baseball growing up in those communities, and very much growing up in those communities without any kind of really queer representation in those groups, and very much as well, even though, you know, I made it part of my identity being an athlete, not having a huge number of and definitely no bisexual role models that kind of, if you kept doing sport as a girl, you were queer, but bisexual wasn't really on the radar. Also more recently, for the last kind of 3-4 years, been climbing, and very excited by Blockhouse coming to Sydney in Marrickville and being involved just as a foundational member and friends with a lot of the team there, to be involved with a gym that could really have their whole opening and their whole design and their launch in Sydney grounded with really good inclusive principles is really cool, because so many other sports spaces have to develop that mindset and that inclusivity. So that's where I'm at. I don't have too much to plug in that space, but if any panelists are field hockey players around Sydney, please come and join UTS. We need more players, so that's my only plug. Thanks.
Thank you. Bowie, would you like to go next? You're on mute. Unmute you. There you go.
I unmuted me. My button didn't work. Hello. I'm Bowie. I use they, them pronouns. I am a fitness coach. I work especially with Russian style kettlebells. So kettlebells, cast iron ball with a handle, one of the most majestic pieces of training equipment you will ever pass your eyes across, in my totally unbiased opinion. I work on online training, supporting trans and gender diverse people to connect with their bodies, transition, whether it's in a medical or non-medical way, to support them to just move in the ways that feel good and affirming for them. When it comes to practicing sports, I do practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is like grappling. So much fun. I've acquired my blue belt to this point, having had stopped because of COVID though, but you know, we'll get there eventually. And just keeping going. So I practice training, and yeah, work with queer folks from the community in our online space. So if anyone's ever keen to check it out, Fearless Movement Collective, you can find us on Facebook and come and get some good old queer training.
Thank you. I'll pop the link in the chat as well. Ipek, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ipek. I am here because I volunteer and help Riley out with the Climbing Cuties, and I've been doing that for like the past year. And it's just been glorious. And I don't consider myself to be a particularly like sporty person, but movement and like awareness around movement and activity has changed my life for the better. And I think a lot of the reasons that I was afraid maybe of getting involved in sport had to do a little bit with identity, lack of representation. So these issues are near and dear to my heart. And I'm always singing the praises of activity, especially for queer folks. So yeah, that's my bit.
Thank you. And then we've got Kate.
Hi, my name's Cade. I use he, him pronouns. I am a founder of Queer Sport, which is a news site that covers our queer sporting clubs in Victoria and Australia and celebrates their achievements. I also am an ice hockey player, having founded the Southern Lights ice hockey team. Uh, yeah, I'm just really passionate about like the mental health outcomes that can come with playing sport and physical health outcomes. So I really try and focus on getting everyone involved in our sort of sporting community and to give anything a shot, really.
Thank you. So my first question's for you, Kate. I guess so. Yeah, as a queer person, have you ever felt not welcome in queer or non-queer sports in particular? And would you like to share a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, I think that as a bi person, when I played sport initially, I guess it goes in a little bit of the coming out story, which is when I played sport in high school, I was very much closeted. I was representing as a straight male, and therefore, in an environment like sport, straight male gets a lot of pass. Um, so I never really had that unwelcomeness there, but it was when I started playing ice hockey a bit later in life. I didn't have the unwelcomeness part, but I was hesitant to share my identity with teammates. And, you know, even though I knew I was bi straight up, it was something that I didn't share with them straight away.
Mm.
When I knew them, especially being a really niche sport, I find that a lot of LGBT people go towards niche sports, and I think it's because it has a very strong community. I knew my team very well, and when I came out, you know, it wasn't so much a process, but you know, I just, you know, I had my at the time I was in a polyamorous relationship. I had my girlfriend come to some matches and my boyfriend come to some matches, and I'd both welcome them evenly. So I never felt unwelcome because I guess I get a lot of pass being a straight white male. Um, but what I did notice was there's still a lot of subtle homophobia. You know, guys in the change rooms. You know, it's not quite the same, but you know, towel whipping, boys club type stuff that you sort of have to take stock of, and you probably notice more as an LGBT person because of the comfort that you might have felt previously in change room environments and so on. And also homophobic language used maybe in jest and maybe not meant to, you know, cause harm, but it does. But I've been able to have conversations with those people by being that out bi representative to help them address that behavior or understand, and that's been really positive. So I guess that in a way, there is. Um, I haven't so much felt unwelcome, but I definitely do understand how people can feel unwelcome, especially once again people that aren't, you know, masc-looking males. Um, and that's what sort of put me on the path to create stuff like Southern Lights Ice Hockey and Queer Sport to sort of sell that, you know, like it's not just what you see on TV. It's not just what you see, you know, on the sporting ground on a Saturday morning. You know, there are inclusive environments out there that people can enjoy.
Yeah, you're so right. I think there's a lot of behaviors in sporting spaces that can sort of go by unnoticed as being homophobic, or we don't recognize them as being biphobic or transphobic. You know, it's kind of just happens, and it's only until someone comes out then people start tiptoeing a little bit more.
Well, it was quite interesting when I was. Some people might be familiar with the research done at Monash University by Eric Dennison, and when I was when he was looking for people in Southern Lights to sort of talk to that homophobia in ice hockey, um, we wanted to get a good representation of our trans players, our female players, our male players. And I was talking to some of the female players, and I said, "Have you felt unwelcome or homophobic or sexist language?" And they're like, "Not really." And I'm like, "So no one sort of said, oh, you're just a girl, or you just do this, or you just," and they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, that's part of the culture that we need to change." And once I sort of said, like, it may just be that, like, it's that subtle, it's very Australian, sort of subtle, racism and sexism and so on, that you just sort of throw away and discard to one place, that really makes a difference. And once I sort of pointed out, she was actually like, "Yeah, there is. Yeah, okay, I do just accept a lot of this."
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. I think it's kind of part of our Australian culture as well. Bowie, I've got a question for you next. I guess with your experience in sports and LGBTQ advocacy, do you think there are any particular sporting communities that seem to be more progressive? And if so, why that might be?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this builds on what Cade mentioned with talking about kind of those fringe sports. I think one of the most progressive is roller derby, and I'm sure it's mentioned a lot in these sorts of discussions. I spent 3 years skating, actually, and it was probably one of the greatest times I ever felt being part of a team in sports. It's, I think, because also such a kind of revamped sport, and it's been built by a lot of people who felt that those mainstream sports just weren't really the space for them because of all these things that we've heard mentioned so far. I think also climbing as well. I know the climbing that I've done with your group and the QTs and stuff like that, also another rad space. Short of that, it's really a challenge, especially within those mainstream spaces, to try and change that culture because it has become so ingrained in so many clubs and even newer sporting clubs around the communities. It's the whole mainstream culture of sports that I think causes that kind of hesitation there to not be so open. And yeah, the newer styles of sports that are coming through are definitely those ones that are so much more open, or casual sports as well, actually. It's anything outside of a club structure, I think you'll find are going to be much more open, much more accepting of people. Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah, do you think
kind of
it's
toxic sports culture.
do you think it's I feel like some of the sports that aren't as competitive have more social spaces as well, so people can go without feeling the need to perform? Do you think that plays?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And that whole, it's like if you're going into a club and you're wanting a casual space, then the team isn't going to be accepting of you because there's that kind of ego-driven competition and competitive edge, regardless of the level of competition that people are actually playing at. There's definitely kind of that culture that just feeds into it, regardless of kind of what grassroots level they're starting at.
Yeah. So my next question is for Yolanda. Could you please give me some examples of when you felt supported in sporting spaces, and what that looks like, just so I guess people can kind of imagine what, they could do in their own spaces?
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, just stemming from what Kate and Bowie have been talking about, I think those fringe sports absolutely do that really well. And I think part of it is that competitive element, but part of it is also because I think generally people are less inclined towards team sports now, partially because of the commitment. So there's this real appeal for other reasons to do those kind of really social sports. And because there actually is quite a lot of competition now for that, I think that's also promoting, like, you have to be inclusive to be able to get more people to come and do your sport. But for me, I think part of the reason that climbing for me was a really supportive environment, partially was just because I was already out and comfortable with myself by the time I went into it. Whereas growing up doing a sport and being in hockey right through growing up, you have to change your relationship with the sport and the people in the space as part of that kind of coming to terms with yourself process. So I found that, like, that personal aspect of it more convenient for me with climbing. But at the same time, the climbing community, as has kind of been talked about here, had kind of dedicated spaces for queer climbers. So in Sydney, there's a Queer Climbers Sydney that have a Wednesday night event. The blockhouse, as they were set up, have an inclusive policy statement that's actually prominent in the gym, have queer members of staff. So you're coming in and you have people that you know from the community. So you've already got kind of one foot in the door with that connection to community, because the way they've even staffed their gym, you know, creates that connection. Plus just, you know, friendly people is always going to be a plus, and just having that space to be social really makes a difference. For me as well, though, I have this sense that with hockey and those more competitive sports, part of what Bowie was saying, that because people are focused on that competitive aspect, it changes that inclusive dynamic. But that was also really helpful for me and supportive for me in the hockey environment, because the team had a different goal that was not related to like my sexuality at all. It actually made it a supportive space, because here's a bunch of people that actually don't give a crap, which is nice, that they don't care as long as I show up to training and perform. So, you know, different aspects of supportiveness in the different spaces, but either being focused so much on a different goal that they don't really, there's no negative elements associated with the sexuality, or those spaces that are really designed to kind of include community in their staffing and their structures, which then also includes their customer base.
Yeah, there's so many great ideas. Thank you. And I think like the gym in Sydney Blockhouse, they do have a really good opportunity. Being a new facility, they can kind of set up an inclusive safe space from the get-go, which is just really fantastic. My next question is for EPEC. So have you ever needed to withhold your sexuality in a sporting space, and whether or not that's to feel included or not in the space that you've been in?
That's a great question. I think for me, the places where I felt like I need to hide who I am the most, I think like in group sport spaces. So like if you're on a, let's say, all girls team or something, there's a lot of fear that somehow in the locker room you're going to make someone maybe uncomfortable unintentionally. And I think we see that sometimes when people are like really afraid online, like transphobic language around having someone trans use like the women's bathroom, and the fear that those haters tend to put out. I think that's sort of like, it's also like, okay, so these people are afraid of being uncomfortable in what's supposed to be a very safe like locker room environment where they can change comfortably, and I really, really don't want to infringe on that. So I would make myself really small and really hide to get away from those feelings. And when people out in the sporting world are like biphobic or homophobic at all, that's like a huge red flag for me to get small. So as soon as I see that little rainbow sticker somewhere at the gym, wherever it is, like on someone's lapel, it makes a huge difference to me that I don't have to be small. I don't know if it makes sense to anybody else, but it almost means I can perform better from a sport perspective, because I'm more willing to like push myself physically because I feel safe enough to exist. So yeah, I think the team environments and the locker rooms are probably like where I've experienced that the most.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone in this group can probably affirm to how important it is to have those little rainbows around. I mean, we have them at Pride events, but having them all year round as well is just a nice way of signaling that to someone who might be questioning or who's unsure, or maybe someone that's not out yet as well. So we've got a question in the Q&A, which I might just put out to the group to see if anyone wants to answer. So it says, I'm an ally who coaches basketball with kids of all ages and backgrounds, and I'd love some advice on how best to help LGBTQ athletes feel comfortable in my environment, and how best possibly to reach out to a child. I think it's going through some things in regards to their sexuality.
I'll jump in first. I can only answer from my own perspective of running a clubs and being I was senior vice president of Ice Hockey Victoria for a while, and I run 2 clubs at the moment. And I think the key thing, not just for sports, but for youth in general, is you just need to be supportive of them as a person. You don't need to. I don't think any kid wants special rules because they're gay or lesbian or bi or trans or going through stuff. They just want your support of them. So if they're, obviously that comes with, there's all sorts of scenarios that could come up, but as long as you're supporting them to be their best, and you sort of go, I don't care about, not I don't care, more empathy way, but you just want them to be the best person they can be, and as long as they're doing that, then that's a great outcome for everyone sort of involved. Of course, there's, like I said, a million different scenarios to work through, and I don't really have an answer to everything, but that's my big advice, is to just support them as a person and don't sort of single them out. Peer pressure is tough.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think it's also just that seeing the little rainbows around, right? And it doesn't need to be a big call out in a specific conversation, and probably trying to have a really specific conversation is probably not a great idea. That often kind of sport can be a really safe space for people because they're not particularly out in that space and they get to just do the sport in that space. But having those little symbols that show that, if they are ready to talk about it, you're not going to be someone that's going to turn them away is key. So wear a badge, have a little sign up on the wall, whatever it is. And I think for a lot of clubs, sporting clubs in particular, having policies around kind of how you are protecting young people and how you're inclusive of the kids that are coming through your sport, having policies that aren't really strict on your gender between your sporting teams and are really prohibitive in the way that they run. Having those inclusive policies sets up that framework without you needing to have a one-on-one conversation with that particular kid.
Yeah, I think policy's so important because it's not just for when things go badly, it's for opportunities for people to talk. It's an invitation for people to recognize when they can reach out. And so even having examples of scenarios that someone can read and say, oh, that's something that may have happened to me, who can I reach out to? So yeah, having those invitations out there so that if they wanted to talk about it, they can, and if not, then they can just continue on with their game. Anyone else like to jump in or continue on?
Just quickly, there's some great resources that the trans and gender diverse inclusion in sport guidelines and some stuff like that they kind of give you tips and advice on ways that you can approach circumstances, structuring within the club and that sort of thing. That would a really great way to kind of just come up to date with what is kind of best practice in those spaces.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We'll put those in the chat as well. So my next question is for Cade as well. So Cade, thinking about your project, Queer Sport, do you feel like more can be done to represent bi and pansexual athletes in the space?
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons I created Queer Sport was to celebrate those achievements and everything that we have. Like, I guess there's a lot of different clubs and organizations out there that sport. Like, I wouldn't have known of Climbing Cuties, Bushrangers basketball I didn't really know of. I would see some organizations like Melbourne Chargers who have had success with the Bingham Cup and some stuff like that, who are gay male team, but I wasn't aware of all these spaces for different types of athletes who have really strong trans, non-binary representation in sport. And I remember one of my first discussions, I read a piece for Star Observer that spoke to Stella from Bushrangers basketball, and her whole approach was, we don't care if you can play, like, can't throw a ball, great. Like, can't catch, can't throw, great. That's, that you're our type of player. And it was that sort of attitude, as opposed to the strictly gay male environment, was great to see that like there was this sort of community that if not, it was predominantly non-binary or trans, you know, or even just predominantly female. And that was really good because I just didn't see that even in the LGBT sports space. Everyone's sort of siloed, and one of the reasons that I did queer sport was to try and bring people like I know there's a Quidditch club in Brisbane, and you know there's an AFL team in Perth, and you know also seeing a lot of gaps like I think Bushrangers basketball are the only ones in Tasmania or Northern Territory at the moment. And they've had great success there. And you know, there's some really big gaps in sports, but it's sort of bringing those little achievements out. Like, you know, I spoke to Riley when they did the Trans Cuties sort of program to sort of mentoring program, and it's really hard for those clubs to get outside of their own audience. Like, you're sort of in there or you're not, and some clubs do it well, and then some clubs just can't break out of that. How do we get new people? And it's very slow to grow. So sort of with having queer sport and sort of going, let's celebrate those little achievements, like someone launched a club in Sydney, someone launched a new program, someone won a cup, someone had their first game, or you know, something like that. It sort of just provides exposure beyond that one club to a whole sporting community. And I think that sort of links back to that bi and pan representation of, you know, it's very easy to fly under the radar as a bi or pan person. And by sort of bringing the whole community up and having those strong bisexual, you know, role models like ourselves, it, you know, from various clubs, like you start talking about them as well. So you're not only talking about the club, you're talking about these different types of people, and non-binary people and trans people and bi people, and it sort of fills out those gaps in the community that we don't really see when a club's just sort of promoting itself.
Yeah, and I really encourage if there's other people that are involved in sports to collaborate and work together, because like you said, they seem to be quite siloed. But I've met other people playing other sports, and a lot of our climbers use climbing as a stepping stone to get into another sport. They go climbing for a couple of times and they're like, oh, now I feel like I'm a sporty person, so maybe I'll try ice hockey, or maybe I'll go, you know, play basketball or whatever it is. And it's those, we've had a few collaborative events and we've seen people transition from one sport to the other, and that's been really nice, because they don't have to stick to climbing for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that when I started Southern Lights Ice Hockey, it was, you know, people were like going, oh, you know, it's the LGBT ice hockey team and you're creating players for your team. And it's like, I'm creating ice hockey players and I'm creating sports people, like, or, you know, athletes or whatever part they want to call themselves. It's like, I don't care if they play ice hockey for a season and then go do climbing or like whatever. If they've got confident in the sporting environment and then branched out and tried something or many things new, great, because that gives the mental and the physical outcomes that we're all in it for. So like, fantastic. I don't care if they stay with us. Like, if they're happy doing something else, then fantastic. As long as they're sort of keeping mentally and physically fit, fantastic.
Yeah, the more sporty bi plus people we have, the better.
Yeah.
So next question for Bowie. Would you say that are there any bi or pansexual athletes that you look up to?
You know what? I saw this question and I actually don't. I was like, who are the athletes that I follow? Like bunches of lesbians. But no, like, and particularly within the sports that I'm like really engaged in following, which is like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and stuff like that, it is so cis-het centric. Not surprisingly, I don't think martial arts are really a space for a lot of queer folks, but yeah, it's like been quite eye-opening thinking about that and realizing that no one that I would follow, like who's prominent. Yeah.
I guess it's pretty similar in climbing too, but we're starting to build the community now, so starting to see more role models? I don't know, Ipek, did you want to jump in?
I saw that question and I also was like, oh damn, like so that's relatable. But it also reminded me to take stock of the fact that like I am also surrounded by a beautiful community of humans that are athletes very much, and they deserve that title. And it doesn't have to just be like super famous people. And everybody that I look up to in the queer community that's also doing sports, I came into contact with them like literally through cuties. So yeah, it's I think it's easier to find those role models maybe like locally, and with as your neighbor, and like yeah, for now, but soon we will take over.
Yeah, thank you. So Yo, I've got a question for you here. So we know that a lot of young people, I guess, stop playing sports or they don't start playing at quite a young age. So I think it's about usually in high school where they, if they identify as part of the LGBT community. What would you say is an important message, or how can we try and encourage rainbow youth to participate in sports?
I think having visible role models is a huge part of that. And that's both elements of role models. Like we need high profile role models as well as, you know, kind of their parents' friends that their parents play sport with, that happens to be bisexual or LGBT. You know, there needs to be enough kind of infiltration across just the people that these kids relate to. And I think kind of, you know, the friends of parents and the coaches in the sporting clubs, those kind of roles, having queer representation helps to keep those kids in sport. I think another thing that is an influencing factor, which is interesting for women in particular, is that's also when a lot of girls just generally stop playing sport. And I think the fear of being labelled queer for doing sport as a female is a big element of that. So it's kind of like the opposite, a little bit between men and women, you know, at that transitional age where it's kind of like, you know, you almost have to do sport as a boy to not be gay. And if you do sport as a girl, you are definitely gay. And getting over those stereotypes is a big part. So having that real just strong diversity in both our high profile role models, and I saw that there was a question in the chat about how do we get our, you know, AFL stars to be to be bi. And realistically, on a numbers game, it's to come out as bi, not necessarily to be bi. And there's a whole cultural piece in that, you know, climbing cuties are doing a fair part of the work for that. There's a lot of organisations that Kate's talk about doing that grassroots work, but it's a full cultural shift to allow people to feel comfortable to be who they are at sport. There's no silver bullet, unfortunately, but starting with, you know, coaches being accepting, having policies in place for sports that are coaching young kids. So having Cricket Australia, Netball Australia, Soccer Australia, Hockey Australia, like those big organisations, having policies that filter down right through to the local club where you sign up your 5-year-old kid, that's really where we need to be to start making a difference.
Thank you. And I guess sort of in response to that question as well, you know, sometimes I've spoken to sporting groups and they've said that, oh, we don't have any athletes that are gay that they know of, or that are queer or anything. And, you know, my response is, well, they don't have to be an athlete. You can get a coach that's out and proud. Like it can be someone else that's a decision maker within your club, or that's visible, or sort of like, you know, plays that role of like a mentor to the athletes as well. So you can start somewhere. Surely there's someone, hopefully, that's gay or bi in your community. And if not, then there's maybe something else going on in the club potentially as well.
That comment that you made there where people are like, oh, there's no one like that in our club, is so homophobic in and of itself, because it's them saying, well, I know what someone who's queer looks like, so I'm going to make that judgment and say, and that is such a big indicator of how unsafe their space actually is if no one is willing to come out, when statistically it's like 1 in 10 people are queer or something like that.
Yeah, you're totally right. So there could be something else happening in the background there.
Just to add to that, one thing that came out of Eric's research is, and it links back to the junior question that we had before with junior sports, and this question with the AFL is that a lot of queer sports people drop out of sport at a high school level and never get back into sport. Um, and that, so they don't just, a lot of queer athletes just don't go along that elite track ever. Like it's because there hasn't been the support systems in at a local level, at a junior level, and so on that haven't really existed previously, which we're hopefully all doing now. It hasn't had that track to be an AFL footballer because they drop out before they, at 14, 13 years old, and they just don't get there. But hopefully through awareness, through programs like this and climbing cuties and queer sports and all sorts of programs, that we're making that sporting environment more acceptable, so those queer athletes will be able to follow along that track and be at that elite level and be that representation that we want.
Yeah, thank you. My next question's for EPEC. So can you tell us why Bi, Pan and Bi Plus representation is important in sport, and maybe tell us a little bit about the positive impacts that you've seen in climbing?
Yeah, I mean, for all the reasons that we just covered, where it encourages people to like sort of envision themselves in a space in the future. So even if maybe you're not particularly sporty, or it's been a couple of years since your high school track team disbanded, whatever, just being able to see that there's like someone out there. And I know for me, as like a cis, short, definitely now slightly chubby woman, it makes it helps me a lot when I see people who have like a similar shape to me doing activities. And it helps me a lot to be like, okay, cool, like it's not just for the people in the magazines or whatever Sports Illustrated things. We're just bombarded with this very singular view of what health looks like and of what sporty people look like, and it's so inaccurate when you actually get out into community and see the variety of humans that thrive doing sports. And in climbing specifically, like some of the positive impacts, it's just that like it just brings some joy, like the fact that you can come together as a group and have a bit of a laugh and encourage each other. I know for me, climbing makes me feel really strong, like, and that the idea that I'm like physically strong, it doesn't matter. Like I could be just as weak tomorrow as I am today, but the fact that I like tried to do something, it just makes me feel more resilient as a person. And that's really important for people who are in our queer community, because we have worse mental health outcomes just because we face more adversity in society. So any tool that we can possibly have and share and give to each other that can increase our odds of doing better, it's so important. And I mean, that's why I'm passionate about accessibility in sport.
Thank you. But there's actually a question in the Q&A that kind of relates to this. I might just put it up to the group. So many of my queer clients have so much trauma in their bodies about sport and exercise that they've avoided in their whole life. What are the best ways to help them move more?
I might go first here, because a lot of the people I support have similar experiences, and it comes from what IPAC mentioned with the messaging that's put out there through the media, that, you know, if you've got to fulfill a certain stereotype or look a certain way, then you can access the thing. But if you don't look like that, or if you don't act like that, or have that sort of kind of view, then you don't have acceptance in the spaces. And it's huge in sports, it's huge in gyms, and all that messaging that goes with it. It's very cis, het, and white centric, and it deters so many people. And I've had crew come to me and say, well, I want to start training with you for a while so that I can go to the gym, because I want to look like I'm going to fit into the gym, but I can't go to the gym until I've lost weight. I can't go to the gym until I've built some muscle. And it's sad. These are spaces that are supposed to be there to support people, to build people up, whether it's sport, whether it's gyms, in whatever fashion the activity is given out. And instead, what they're doing is creating more shame in people, more self-judgment, and more avoidance of doing the things that would actually help them feel better. And what I've found with supporting the people that I support is that it starts with what they are comfortable with doing, where they are at, because we've oftentimes, we look at how sports and training is applied, and it's always a really high intensity, really pushed for, you've got to train hard, you've got to work hard. It's, you've got to be the best. And it's really harmful rhetoric in itself, because most people, one, don't want to be that. They just want to learn to do some things that helps them feel a bit better in their bodies. And it doesn't require like a huge, massive thing to do that. So I would suggest starting by just asking people if there's anything that helps them feel good when they move. Do they like going for a walk and that helps them feel better? Do they dance? Do they, like, I saw someone mentioning Ring Fit, the games that help you get a little bit physically active. All these things are such incredible avenues that people can start just learning to move their body and learning what their body feels like while they're moving, because that's a new experience and it's very different and it can be uncomfortable. So just approaching it gradually with like small steps and exploring what might work for them and what doesn't. If it doesn't work, it's totally okay. Like, there's no failure in trying something out and then changing your mind. And that's a huge part as well, because it's okay to not like something. It's okay to not like physical activity. It's okay to try something and be like, nah, it's not my bag, so encourage them to just explore ways that it feels good, and start, like, they can start in private. It's always a great way too, where they don't feel like someone's going to be watching them. And that makes a huge difference as well, because it feels awkward and weird, like moving your body for the first time. It's just weird. And even if it's training, like some of the movements that people are doing, they're genuinely just weird movements. It's like, you would not do this outside of a gym, because like, it's weird. You're bending over and jamming your butt out. Like, that's weird in any situation. But if everyone does it together, not so weird. So just getting comfortable with that, the weirdness of moving, and just, finding those ways that you can feel a bit good from doing it is always a great place to start. It doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be for long periods of time or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm just now thinking about all the weird positions I get into when I'm exercising and thinking about doing that in everyday scenarios. But yeah, it's so true. Thank you. So I've got a question here for Kate. So Kate, can you tell us a little bit about what can be done better in sporting spaces? So maybe for the allies in this group, what can they do either individually, or if they manage a space, what can they do to support inclusion?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is, like, for the people that are allies or sporting club administrators or whoever they are, coaches, I think all of us in this chat have probably asked ourselves this exact same question. I know that, like, I spoke to Riley and I spoke to others going, like, I have Southern Lights, but I also have Ice Wolves, which is another team I am president over, which plays in a regular league, non-LGBT team. We've got 4 teams, and it's always like, so how can I make them more inclusive? Like, how, it's a question for myself as well. I think a lot of it is to do with having a strong message that you are inclusive. So there's a lot of small things that you can do. For instance, obviously it has to be in good faith, which I hope everyone is in good faith, but like having flags or signs or something to sort of show that you're inclusive, backing it up with policy from reputable sources. And I know Good Sports has lots of like drug and alcohol and sort of policies. Speaking to other clubs, I know I've spoke to Climbing Cuties and Bush Rangers and other clubs and went, so how did you get this non-binary following? Or how did you engage this community or this subset of the community, and how they achieve that? And a lot of it's it's a lot of little things. There's no, I can't tell you like a lot of people look for a solution here to like how can I be this inclusive sporting club, and there's no one way. It's a whole heap of little things. It's for example, Bush Rangers campaigning in their mixed gender league to have more inclusive rules around non-binary players. It's making sure like discriminative rules of all sorts to sort of out, working with venues around bathroom changes, and there's a lot of little things that sort of go. But I think the key thing is to sort of show outwardly that you are inclusive, is to have leadership. I know I talk about, I'm very honest about who I am and I don't hide that. So I have had people who have came to one of our players in the league was transitioning, and because I was this outward role model, they sought advice about how it might affect them. They had someone to confide in and be that person that they could talk to. So being that outward role model and talking about issues and confronting them and really owning really has a waterfall effect that allows other issues to sort of come to light. And you can show that through your messaging, communications, make sure everything's inclusive. And yeah, I guess I don't have really one. I don't want to go around in circles, but it's not any one thing. It's a lot of little things. I think we all know what's right, and I think we all know how including non-binary people, bi people, pan, gay, LGBT community is important. And it's just to make sure that you're not sort of pushing them to one side or just assuming that people are welcome. Like, just don't go, oh yeah, we're welcome because we know we're welcome, that they are. Like, get some flag, get some messaging, sort of target those people and get talking to them and be a role model.
Yeah, it sounds like you're almost talking like the concept of, saying, oh, we don't care, anyone can come and go if they like, we're welcoming. But then there's such a difference between inviting people into the space and saying, we want you to be part of our community, please come along. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about in terms of like putting that big, really clear message out there, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it. You need to be, it's one thing to be open, it's another thing to be inviting. Yeah. And really what you want to do is be inviting to people who may have apprehensions about coming in to, I guess, your sort of subset of a community.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got a question here for EPEC as well, and I know we're running close to time, so this might be our last one, but we'll see how we go. What piece of advice would you give your younger self or someone who thinks that sports is not for them?
Yep, that's another good one. I feel like Bowie touched on this a lot as well, where like just being gentle with yourself about it wherever you are in the process. And like, of course, like if I could talk to my younger self, I would just try to lead by example and be like, fuck the cis het things going on in sport. Like, you don't have to be number one. You can just do you and be number 1 billion and it's fine. And I think I like gravitate to like group sports, like things like swimming or climbing, because my only competitor is me yesterday. So I think, yeah, trying to remove that competitive aspect of it and just be like, I'm just here to wiggle around, and I know this releases endorphins and I feel great. So making that the motivating factor, and not holding judgment. And if you can find that from a group of people, if you're inexperienced as well, like the amount of times I've tried to go to a personal trainer and they're like, go harder, do more, like, come on, give me 10 more. And I'm like, I don't resonate with the drill sergeant. Please stop shouting at me. Like, this doesn't make me work harder. Just like acknowledge what motivates you. And if being shouted at doesn't motivate you, that's valuable information. You can take that to people like experts who can then, they just know how to nudge you along if you're needing some help or whatever. And that exists too. I think just knowing that exists is valuable. Anyways, yeah, I know we're short on time.
Thank you. It's just making me think of also it goes back to representation and role models, which we were talking about before. But when I see videos of people climbing, and it's always the hardest climb, it's always the toughest one, it's always the most difficult thing, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to see myself in that space. So, you know, I want to see someone having fun. I want to see someone falling off and like having a laugh, so I can see myself going to do that climb. Otherwise I'll be like, why would I go to the gym? So yeah, I guess it's just about fun. Like, we all enjoy sports, and I'm sure everyone can find their own fun in sports as well. We might have one more question because I've got 5 minutes more on my clock. So I'm going to throw it back to Yo, and ask, in terms of visibility of bi and pan athletes in the media, so in advertising and publicity, I guess, what sort of role do you think that has to play, and I guess the social capital that media, or people that have that media and put it out, have to play in this space?
I mean, obviously, bi and pan athletes, or out bi and pan athletes, have not played a big role in those spaces to date, considering the difficulty of the panel of coming up with some good role model names, right? No one's on a Nike billboard. But, you know, you do have, and especially someone commented in the comments about, you know, the AFLW already being 50% queer, right? And as we do promote women's sport, which is often a more queer space, we start to get some of those role models. So, you know, Sam Kerr is a queer athlete that is Nike sponsored, has had billboards. Like, that's pretty awesome. We need more people like that to be in those spaces. And I think in the media landscape as well, writing articles about people, actually promoting ourselves as well. So, you know, anyone attendees for this that are writers, have it in, you know, write about queer athletes, write about queer sport. If it's not out there, it can't get picked up, it can't have the publicity. There's so many more avenues now with social media to be promoting things. So you've got more informal avenues to promote queer athletes. We've got to use them because the mainstream lags, we know that. So we've got to create that groundswell of interest before it will start to get picked up and have that broader cultural change for what the media is interested in looking at.
Thank you. I think that's pretty much it in terms of time. Did anyone else want to add any final comments before I close up? No. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank the Melbourne Bi Network. Wonderful big thank you to the Big Bi Bonanza team, and also the organisers of Stand By Us. Lots of bi puns in there. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to I've recorded the event as well, so I'll put it online, and so you can share it around with your friends and your peers.
Yay!
Everyone.
Thank you, Riley, for being a legendary host.
See you later.
Yeah.
Bye.